Welcome back to another episode of the Media Pass. I'm your host, Alex, joined as always by your other host, Matt. Matt, how you doing?
Pretty good, man. Pretty good. I don't know why I ummed. Actually, I want to say something really quick to the audience. I'm going to miss college until the end of time, but being out of it is pretty freaking cool, man. Like today, I woke up like 7 and I worked until like noon. And then I took my dog on a walk for an hour. Now I'm podcasting with Alex. Probably go golfing later. You know, just like vibes are high right now, man. Like I don't have any I was never a good student, but like I think it's even more stressful being a bad student because you're always stressed about like the stuff you're not doing. But like now it's like I don't have any schoolwork to do. So like if I want to right now, dude, I could scout out Charlie Villanueva's rookie season. I could like do a deep dive scout if I really wanted to. Isn't that crazy?
You're living the dream.
Yeah. Life is good. So yeah, college is missed. I miss it very dearly, but I'm starting to adjust to this post-college lifestyle, man.
To those listening, Matt just graduated law school. We talked about this in the last episode. Everyone drop a congrats in the comments. Speaking of the comments, we had some questions in the comment section of last episode. And this is our first return to answering questions in a while. It's been like, I guess only one episode where we didn't answer questions, but that was like, weeks and weeks and weeks ago. So first question that we have is, do y'all think, this is from Behind the Arc YT, excuse me, I almost said Beyond the Arc. Think it's clear Donovan Mitchell, Garland, Mobley, and Jarrett Allen all don't fit next to each other. Since that's the case, do y'all think the Cavs should trade Garland and Jarrett Allen or Garland and Mobley this offseason?
Can I run point on this?
Yeah, I was going to say. I was just about to say you should run point on this.
Yeah, because this is something that's really near and dear to my heart. I feel like I've been on this since like the beginning of the season, with the whole the big four needs to be split in half, turn to a big two kind of thing. I actually wrote something about this on Forbes the other day, just kind of like a preview of their offseason. But I think there's it's a 3-step process. Step one is like, does Donovan Mitchell want to be there? That's got to be the first question, right? If Mitchell wants to be there, you do whatever you can to retain him. Okay. If he wants to be there, Garland's got to go. It seems like he would request a trade anyways, is what we're hearing. So between Allen and Mobley, I think it's a really interesting conversation. Allen's 3 years older than Mobley. Allen was at the epicenter of their best stretch of the season when they went 19-7 in December and January. He is going to cost less than Mobley once Mobley signs his rookie extension. I think he's only making like $20 million a year. He's under contract the next 2 seasons. If Mobley gets the rookie extension, not this season he'll be cheap, but the following season he'll be worth about like $35 million a year. If the salary cap doesn't go up. If it goes up, he'll be worth even more. But Mobley had a great postseason. He has a higher ceiling because of his youth. I don't think you could go wrong with either one of them. I could see like the logic behind both of them, but I don't think it's tenable for them to both be together. I think because the thing is, like, one of them would have to be the backup center, and they're just overqualified for that, right? Like, I think Larry Nance Jr. would be a better backup center. Like, he's more qualified, or like, honestly, Jonas Valanciunas would be like a nice backup center to Evan Mobley. Like, I feel like he would do numbers off the bench, like 15-7 in like 12 minutes of play against bench lineups. So step 2 is figure out which one of the bigs you want to keep, and then step 3 is acquiring the right pieces for the 2 players you end up trading. The good thing is, like, all 4 of these guys are like really good. And so like you can get good stuff for them. What I would try to get is like one of the better 3-and-D role players in the NBA. I had like a list made up. It was like, I can't off the top of my head. It was like Herb Jones. I'm blanking right now. Herb Jones, Mikal Bridges, the names you've heard. Caleb Martin in a sign and trade. I really like that. If they could get Caleb Martin, I think that'd be a really good piece. And then you also want to get like a backup big man who is a little bit different than the big man they end up keeping, but also is not overqualified or at least overpaid to be a backup big man. But so to answer your question, I think they should definitely reshuffle the deck. But I will say this. I think the Cleveland Cavaliers could be a title contender next season if they do this offseason properly.
Yeah, I think they're one of the few teams where, like, for a lot of teams, you'll get to this point where it's pretty cut and dry of like, okay, you either have enough or you don't, and you need to blow it up. But for the Cavs, it's like, you don't quite have enough right now, but you're pretty dang close. You're about as close as you can get without being fully there. Mm-hmm. I mean, we talked earlier on in the season about like, yeah, this team actually, like, if they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals, it wouldn't surprise me. If they ended up in the finals, it would be maybe a little surprising, but it wouldn't be like the most unbelievable thing in the world. So I'm with you. Yeah, if they do this offseason properly, things could change quick for them. They're already so good.
Can I say something real quick about this? What you just said? It's like for people who like count their macronutrients, right? It's like they have enough calories in their plate. They just need to like, they need a little bit less fat, a little bit more carbs, a little bit more protein. It's so like the sum of it is like there. Like I think they have enough like pure raw talent on that team to be a title contender. It just needs to be reorganized.
What an analogy. That was fantastic. Next question. We'll keep things moving here from Ian Kernut 3350. Love the content, guys. We are so back. Thank you. We are back. Who is a current or past player that is not a superstar or all-star that you would be scared of taking the game-winning shot against your team?
Is there any other answer? Say
it.
Give me Andre Iguodala.
There it is. There it is. We were both thinking the exact same thing. Okay. Real answer.
Because he's actually an all-star.
I mean, Jamal Murray's not an all-star or a superstar. I'd be scared of Jamal Murray taking that shot. Maybe not after last night, but we'll get into that. I'm trying to think. I guess Jamal Murray doesn't really count because he's probably like he's all-star caliber. Who would you say?
You know who you would like? Yeah, I was going to say you're going to like this answer. Dante DiVincenzo.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a good one for sure. I'm trying to think of like, obviously there's, scorers, but I'm trying to think if there's any like more just like off ball spot up guys that I would just be deathly terrified of taking that shot. That's a really good question that I feel like I would have to almost do a like deep dive on to answer. But yeah, Dante DiVincenzo, I like that answer. That's a good one. I think that was our last question, actually, now that I'm looking at it. We only had 2 questions. So if you are listening right now and you have a question that's just sitting on your heart that you need to get off your chest, go ahead, leave it in the comment section. We will answer it at the beginning of next episode. All of that out of the way, we have some playoff basketball to talk about. The conference semifinals have now concluded. We know that in the West, we're going to have a matchup between the Dallas Mavericks and the Minnesota Timberwolves. And in the East, we have the Boston Celtics versus the Indiana Pacers. Last night, the Timberwolves beat the Nuggets in Game 7. And then the night before that was OKC and Dallas. Dallas took down OKC in 6. Let's do some eulogizing of these teams that were eliminated. We'll get to the Pacers and the Knicks. We already talked about the Celtics and the Cavs because that feels like it happened years ago. The Thunder. I've got some things that I want to say about the Thunder. Specifically, I think the phrase that has ran through my head the most when thinking about my like big takeaways for OKC is I hope they learned their lesson. And that lesson is you have to get rebounds. I understand the whole you can offset rebounds to a certain extent by generating turnovers and not turning the ball over as much. I get that. That is not untrue. But matchup specifically, when you have a matchup that is so overwhelmingly better than you in the rebounding department, that is consistently game shifting. And I think we saw OKC did not have the size and the personnel to be able to fight on the glass. And it's very like old school buzz phrasey to talk about rebounds so heavily. But I mean, in this case, I really do think it's true. If you watch that game 6, I mean, the game was won on the boards. Dallas got so many extra possessions and they capitalized on them. OKC couldn't end possessions. It was very, very frustrating to watch. And I think the bigger macro level piece of the puzzle is flexibility. It's not just that, OKC didn't get enough rebounds. It's that they didn't have the personnel to even try to get more rebounds. They were married to, we have Chet, who is an untraditional center, and he's not going to get a ton of boards. He's going to try his best, but we don't really have a ton of guys who are going to be able to crash the glass and compete against the Daniel Gaffords and the Derek Liveleys and the PJ Washingtons and Derek Jones Jr.'s for that matter. I understand OKC's philosophy of like, we've got these athletic, skilled kind of wings, but you still need size. You still need, and not size in like the tall and long, but size in the like strong, bulky, and can box out. And so, I mean, really, I think it's not as simple as, nothing's ever as simple as just getting a backup big, but OKC does need to invest in a quality backup traditional 5. And I'm not saying you run Chet at the 4. I've seen some Thunder fans talk about that. We put Chet at the 4 and have a full-time 5. I think Chet can still be your 5, but you need the flexibility, specifically in playoff matchups like this, to throw out a traditional 5, a Steven Adams type player that can go out there, box out, get rebounds for you, and run to the rim, set screens. That's the other thing that I wanted to talk about with OKC is their offense. The ghost screening stuff is good. I like that. It's unique. It's part of their unique offensive system, and I think it does a good job of getting things flowing. But there is a glaring lack of inability to set hard screens that are able to generate advantages. Chet's screens are, I think he has good screening instincts, but he is not strong enough to get guys stuck on those screens. He is not necessarily, I guess, I don't want to say smart enough, but there's definitely a like a muscle to being able to get away with some stuff setting screens. I'm talking about like, guys like Sabonis do it really well. Bam Adebayo does it really well. Draymond Green does it really well. I'm talking about illegal screens, and I hate that that's a skill in the NBA, is like being able to get away with illegal screens, but it's a real thing. And until officials start to, wise up a little bit and actually call it, then Chet needs to be a little bit better about setting those gray area screens, we'll call them. So I really do hope that OKC evaluates everything this offseason and says, okay, we have the shell, we have the blueprint, we have our identity, we're not far off. But this team is not a finished product. You cannot run it back. And just because you have an identity doesn't mean you don't need flexibility. You always need flexibility. It's something that is always going to reign supreme in the postseason.
Can I say that I think this is a fair thing to say? I think I think this team was perfectly built to be a title contender before the rules changed midseason. And then most importantly, after the trade deadline. Because I feel like a lot of people have been like, you have this treasure chest of assets, and all he did was get washed up Gordon Hayward. Which is, I do fault them for that. I think they could have been a little bit more aggressive. Although, I mean, it's good to know, it's good to see what you have first before you decide what to spend your assets on. And this year was a lot of people didn't anticipate them to be the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. So there's that. But I pulled up a stat. Okay, so before March 1st, which is like the date everyone kind of cites as like the NBA started to allow more physicality, the Oklahoma City Thunder had a +8 net rating, which was second best in the league. 59 games, I think, is the sample size. After March 1st, they played 23 games, and their net rating was a +5.4, sixth best in the league. So still very, very good basketball team. And there's a small sample size and the weirdness of playing bad teams that are tanking. But you could see that it bothered them. It made it's an interesting thing because Dallas has benefited so much from this rule change. It's allowed their flawed defensive personnel guy. Like there's so many plays like where Kyrie Irving is just jamming Shai Gilgeous-Alexander on drives, or Luka Doncic just jamming Dort on a drive, and they're allowed with so much like more physicality now. So I think that rule change helped Dallas a bunch and it hurt OKC a bunch, and we saw that come to fruition in the series. And like you could cite the shooting variance stuff, but I think this physicality thing made it so that the shooting variance could matter. You know, like I think if there was no change in the rules, if OKC was allowed to play their style, because they have so much skill, they have so much spacing, right? But what they don't have is strength. And what this rule change did is it made the strength component a little bit more important. Okay, whereas Dallas, they have pretty good skill, their spacing's meh. They have a lot of like really physical guys. And so that amplified them, diminished what makes OKC very good, and then you add the variance component, and that's kind of how this series comes to play. So like, I think, yeah, you're right. OKC learned something in this series, but also I feel like they wouldn't have had to learn that lesson had, you know, honestly, the landscape of how the game is played changed in the midseason.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, unfortunately, officiating has been something that gets brought up every single. People are acting like
I love the way it is. By the way, I love it.
Oh, I agree. A lot of people are bringing up officiating. They're like, this playoffs, it seems so much worse. And I'm like, it's been a usual level of bad officiating. It's not really been anything that I'm like, this is abnormally bad. It's like, no, it's just as bad as it always is. And it depends on it. This year, I've noticed more than I have in the past that certain officiating crews are worse than others. But, you know, we're not going to dive into all that. And honestly, you can still win a game even if the refs aren't on your side. Like, we can talk about that with Minnesota and Denver, which we'll get to. But just to put a pin in OKC, I think there is enough to be learned that, like, if you eat your vegetables from this series and you just scarf it down and embrace it, they're going to come out a better team as a result of it. But I fully agree that a lot of this stuff was self-inflicted. It did not need to be this way. I will say, or with the Gordon Hayward thing, I did not anticipate him being as washed as he is. I think he
had good indicators. He had good statistical indicators.
He's just, I think he's simply just old, and there is not a ton he's able to do anymore. As far as, being an aggressive part of your offensive approach. He'll maybe still be able to be a spot up guy somewhere. But I think like the athletic, quick, initiating Gordon Hayward that we knew of the past is probably, I don't know how much of that is still left there, but we'll see. Moving on, you want to talk a little bit about the New York Knicks? Yeah,
I mean, it's man, I would cringe right now if I heard our podcast on Friday, just because me and you were basically talking about it like this is before Game 6. And we're doing our Knicks Celtics preview basically, and like credit to this, I tweeted out yesterday, like, yeah, the Pacers got really lucky these last two rounds with what happened to the teams they were playing. But you have to play the teams that are in front of you. You have to execute, and they did that. So credit to them, hat tip to them. I'm super excited to see them in the Eastern Conference Finals. Super excited for this fan base. It's very cool. Very, very cool. But yeah, the Knicks kind of just broke down, which it leaves some questions about Tibbs, excuse me, because like I felt like the whole idea, like this always happens to Tibbs, but like this group was supposed to be, you know, quote unquote different. Like they're built different. They're all built for battle. But they broke down. Brunson going down, Hart, you know, is a shell of himself. Anunoby playing. There was like all those tweets were so funny about the horse tranquilizer and stuff. And he goes out there, plays like 5 minutes. Tibbs shuts him down. Mitchell Robinson out. Boyan out. Yeah, they broke. So what can be learned? I don't know if Tibbs will ever learn his lesson with this stuff. He'll ever change. I guess it's all about just hoping that you get lucky with the injury bug. Obviously, they've got to make some upgrades on this roster, right? Number one step is to retain Hartenstein and Anunoby at any cost. Like you need those two, right? And then it's about, you know, moving Randall, moving what other pieces you can that like are outside of the core. I don't think you can move Hart and Dante just for team identity reasons. Obviously, Brunson's there, so it's about moving those ancillary pieces and trying to
real
acquire.
Quick. I got a question for you.
Yeah,
are we? Yes or no? The Knicks need Julius Randle to contend for a title.
Need him to do what?
Dude, I'm saying yes or no. They need.
Oh,
Julius
no,
Randle.
not at all.
Honestly, I think yeah.
If this team was completely healthy otherwise, like outside of Randall, like I think they would push the Celtics. They would push this Celtics team.
I agree. I'm not saying that they would be worse with Julius Randle. That's not what we're saying at all. There may be some argument you could make. I am not making that argument. I'm saying some people have made that argument. I'm not on this podcast, but the point is, I think, yes, Julius Randle is fully expendable. They can go out and get, you know, cheaper options that maybe fit a little bit better.
Yeah, I think he's expendable. I think Mitch Rob is expendable, even though they missed him a lot in this series. I think it's easier to find backup big men at a discounted rate that can kind of appropriate what he does, even though he's sensational at what he does. He was having a career year before he went down with injury. Not trying to de-integrate that, but you can only have so many assets on your team. Randall, me and you got a lot wrong. We got a lot wrong this postseason. I think I got a little bit more wrong than you, if we're being honest. But we were both on the money with the Randall being the Tyler Hero of this postseason thing. Like, so on the money. We're going to have a separate pod kind of discussing why that phenomenon occurs in the first place and how to kind of pinpoint that. But I think this is let me frame it this way. I think Atlanta, New York, Cleveland, Philadelphia, they all have the ability to put together like a serious contender this offseason. I don't think all of them will, just because that's pretty much impossible. But like, I think those are the 4 teams out east you really want to watch them this offseason, because if they push the right button, I think the Knicks have enough. It's like the Cavs. They have enough calories. It's just about recalibrating the macros. If they do that, they will come back next year and be like a serious title contending team. So it's fun. It's like, I think that Knicks fans should hang their hat high. Their sails fell off the boat. I think that's an analogy. They all like collapsed, and it was a great season otherwise, you know? So yeah. Do you have anything to add to that?
No. Pacers, shout out to them. They did what they needed to do, played the team in front of them. Hats off to them. I thought they still played a great series, even despite like the injury factor at play. I still think the Pacers have proven to me that they are like a legitimate team that can be very frustrating for whoever they run into. Obviously, some of the teams that they saw were not at full strength. I get that. The Pacers are still a very good team and have a lot, and they can only get better. They can only get better at this point. So all credit in the world to them. Do not want to take anything away from them. Last team that we have to eulogize, we've already eulogized the Cavaliers because that happened 5 years ago. Let's talk about the Denver Nuggets. I was watching that game last night. Timberwolves go down 20. I'm like, it's over. It's never happened before. No team has ever come back from being down 20 in a game 7 in the history of the NBA. It's never happened. The Timberwolves, the big story is, the Timberwolves, Naz Reid came in. Naz Reid was absolutely spectacular. He was huge. Cat played what I thought was probably the best in terms of impact, probably the best game of his career. Rudy Gobert was in foul trouble. Cat was in foul trouble. Ant wasn't shooting well, but everything fell right for the Timberwolves at the end there, where I thought even though Ant wasn't shooting well, I thought he played some of the best defense I've seen him play maybe ever. He mucked up Jamal Murray's handle a lot. And a lot of people were saying like Jamal had 35 or 36. So like, how did Ant clamp him up? And I'll be honest, if you watch that game, there is only one, certain guys you can only clamp up so much, but Jamal Murray's perimeter shooting was definitely heavily impacted by Ant's defense. And I thought Ant was forcing turnovers really, really well. And that's where you could make the argument that, Ant clamped him up or whatever. But regardless, I thought Ant played great defense. And that defense turned into offense, which I think is the big thing here. The Timberwolves were just really punishing Denver in transition. Not so much in the first half, but definitely more in the second half. And the other big thing with this game is Nikola Jokic only sat for 1 minute in the entire game. And by the end of the game, Jokic looked exhausted, completely exhausted. So it was unusual seeing Denver this out of character, especially when you look at the last 30 seconds of the game where the Nuggets are down 7, 30 seconds left, down 7, and the Nuggets gave up. Like they literally gave up. They stopped playing defense. And that's when, the Jaden McDaniels thing happened where he threw it on the ground and tried to dunk it, which, if you don't want the other team, the Nuggets started trying to defend again. And so Ant drove and passed it to McDaniels. And it's like, okay, well, if you're going to defend, then we're going to still try and score. So whatever. Different discussion. Who cares? Ultimately, the Nuggets gave up, which I thought was very surprising for a team coming off a championship last year. It was like down 7, 30 seconds left. You're not gonna try.
Well, even who was it who called it out? I think it was Sam Vecini. He had that tweet the play before when Cat gets the put back slam off the cut. Like KCP was just ball watching. They're down 5 with like 40 something seconds left. You're still definitely in the game, and KCP's like doesn't even have the stamina to box out. So they were gassed. And I think that gets at this very interesting thing with this team. I think there's the biggest point of concern heading into the playoffs. We touched on it a little bit. I've written about it a little bit. Just the bench. Thinking Basketball on their podcast, I can't remember if it was Cody or Ben, but one of them made the point that this was after game 2, that like Denver's starting 5, it's the most, like I said, it's the most well-balanced starting 5, I think, in the entire NBA, right? With how it all works together. But the thing about that balance is like, it's got to be in perfect harmony. And when one little piece of that is off, like it messes up the whole thing. And like in game 2, the first 2 games of the series, the problem was Jamal Murray just wasn't good. He wasn't useful. He eventually found himself in this series, had a lot of big games, a lot of big moments. And like you said, I think what you were trying to get at earlier is like all of Murray's best shots came against guys not named Anthony Edwards. Like he was a lot more comfortable against Jaden McDaniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker in game 7. But so tonight, I think what the big thing was Murray and Jokic were fine for the most part. It was the role players like MPJ just couldn't score. he was making a lot of bad decisions. Shout out, who was it? Steph No for pointing out like some of, I don't know if you saw his tweets about MPJ's decision making. He had a lot of good tweets about it. But shout out him for being awesome. Great guy. But and so the thing is, because like Christian Braun comes in and he played good minutes, but like if that's all you have on the bench, like Reggie Jackson was awful. They tried to play him in the third quarter last night for a couple minutes, give Murray a breather. It made things way worse. He couldn't even like dribble the ball up the court. Peyton Watson, who is like supposed to be better Bruce Brown, couldn't see the floor the last 5 games of the series.
Right.
A guy I really like. I had a lot of fun watching him this regular season. But yeah, Justin Holiday, why is he getting so much run? And the thing is,
I will say, Justin Holiday, we were probably past the point of benching him, but he had been playing pretty well, in my opinion, prior to like the last 2 or 3 games. He
got bullied. Like Gobert was like in the second quarter, just
yeah.
You never see Gobert bully guys like that. You never see that. So this brings me to the point of this offseason, because that's the point of these eulogies. We're looking forward, like what's to do. Well, Murray, this team's not. It sounds like they're not going to be paying a lot of luxury tax, right? Their ownership is not one of those big pocket teams. And you got Jokic on the hook for $51.4 million next season. You have Murray for $36 million for MPJ, $24 million for Aaron Gordon, and then KCP has a player option for $16 million. Is he worth more than $16 million? Is he going to want more than $16 million? Probably. We've talked a lot about how good of a role player he is, right? And then after that, it's like, a bunch of cheap contracts. Like how do you make this not happen again? Like, how do you fix your depth? Why, like, all these flawed bench players, how do you remedy that? Christian Braun will get better. Peyton Watson will get better. You'll hopefully be able to pick up a better backup point guard than Reggie Jackson, a more reliable one. Do you try to trade MPJ? Like, it's going to be interesting. Denver's off. I don't think it's that. Obviously they're, still in great shape. They'll still be one of the best teams in the West next year. But this series showed that they have some weaknesses, some that I overestimated personally. I underestimated the weaknesses, overestimated teams' abilities to kind of figure it out just because of how strong the starting lineup's been for the last 2 years. But yeah, this will be an interesting offseason to watch for them.
Yeah. One thing I underestimated was Minnesota's resiliency to not just like fall back on old bad habits and just like, oh, we're like actively collapsing. Let's just continue to collapse. Like, I was surprised with the resolve that they had to just be like, okay, things aren't going well. Let's take a deep breath. Let's recalibrate. Let's stop the run, chill out, get back to our game. And I thought they handled the whole package of this series very, very well. And with a level of maturity that I did not expect. Shout out to them. Shout out Karl Anthony Towns for proving a lot of people wrong. I've been very critical of Karl Anthony Towns in the past. I'll be the first to tell you, and I am more than happy to admit that I'm wrong. He has been fantastic. The shooting has been great. I thought he defended Jokic so well, which is just insane to be saying out loud. Like, who would have thought that we would be praising Karl Anthony Towns for his defense on not just like in general, not just saying like, oh, he played good defense. Defending Nikola Jokic, Karl Anthony Towns was one of the best Nikola Jokic defenders of this offseason. So shout out to him. Probably the best Nikola Jokic defender of the offseasons or playoffs, not offseason, postseason. But seems like a logical segue to now pivot onto this Western Conference Finals matchup.
Actually,
okay. What do you got?
Do we really quickly want to just do the East, or just to like get it over? Because I feel like we want to talk a lot about Minnesota, Dallas.
All right, let's talk about the Pacers Celtics. So, my question here.
Okay.
I have two questions.
Mm-hmm.
One, do you think that the Pacers have a chance if Kristaps Porzingis is healthy? And then my second question is, do you think that they have a chance if Porzingis isn't healthy?
Yeah, so Kristaps is said to miss the first 2 games of this series. That's been announced, but there is a lot of optimism that he'll return shortly after that. Okay, which is a stark contrast from the Cleveland series, where it was basically ruled right away like he's not playing in this series. If Kristaps plays after game 2, unless the Pacers are really diligent and take both games, I have just a really hard time seeing it because, first of all, the Celtics, like everyone will say, like the Pacers have this dynamic offense. Celtics had a better offensive rating in the regular season. Okay, like they have a very, very dynamic offense. Kristaps plays a big part in that. He unlocks a lot for them, kind of on both ends of the ball with his spacing and then also his rim protection. It's very hard to find that blend of player. Like, I mean, you only really see in Chet Holmgren pretty much. But so if he's playing, it's just really hard because they have the offense to match Indiana blow for blow, and then they have an elite defense, whereas Indiana's defense, even though it's improved, it's not great. It's the worst one of the 4 teams remaining by a pretty significant margin. So I just don't see it. If Kristaps is out for this whole series or he misses 4 or 5 games, I still like Boston, but it opens a door for Indiana because Indiana right now, first in this postseason in bench points scored. The Celtics are 7th, and that's factoring in that they had Kristaps for 4 of their 10 playoff games and were able to have Horford on the bench. Right now, Horford's in the starting lineup. If he's got to stay in the starting lineup, your bench is basically Peyton Pritchard, Luke Cornett, and who's the other? Sam Hauser. Okay, that's pretty much what they've been going with. And to be honest, like I much prefer the Pacers, but even though like the Pacers get like in terms of starting lineups, the Celtics have first or second best starting lineup in the league. The Pacers are like bottom of the top 10 in starting lineups, but the bench with Shepherd, who's played really well, T.J. McConnell, who's proved a lot of people wrong. Obi Toppin has had a solid postseason. Isaiah Jackson getting dusted off the shelf after a tough first round and being a nice part of their second round series against the Knicks. Like I'd much prefer that over the Celtics bench. So if you can make up a lot of the differences in the starting lineup with your bench play and you got a deeper team and you guys are healthier and you're younger and you're faster, things get interesting. I'd still take the Celtics, but it gets a lot more interesting. I think at the end of the day, though, Kristaps is like the big piece in all this. Is any differentiating points there?
Yeah, or not really. I think Porzingis is going to make things a lot easier for the Celtics, but I mean, we've seen that the Pacers can do damage against the Celtics team in the regular season. Well, I guess technically not the regular season, the in-season tournament.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Which I guess some of it had overlap, but besides the point. This Pacers team is good enough, and I alluded to this earlier. I think they're a good enough team that, they can take a game or 2 off of anybody, even if the other team is fully healthy. They might even take 3 games. Who knows? A full-strength Celtics team from game 3 onwards, I would be saying this about anybody, except for maybe the New York Knicks if they were fully healthy. I did not, before the playoffs, I did not see anybody beating this Celtics team in a 7-game series if the Celtics are fully healthy. That includes the Pacers. And it's no disrespect to them. I would say that about every single team in the East, except maybe the New York Knicks, because I think the Knicks have an approach that gives the Celtics fits, just because they're a very in the mud team, and teams that thrive in the mud always have a chance. Same with the Heat, I guess, but this Heat team, different discussion, we're getting off track here. I have concerns about the Pacers' ability to put the Celtics in the mud, which is where you get the Celtics to fall back on their old ways and play like morons. I just don't see Indiana putting them in the mud enough, even without Porzingis. I just think this team has they're more airtight, and I'm bought into what the Celtics are doing. Like they understand the math. We've talked about the math of it all before, like how over a 7-game series, they're confident their scheme's going to beat you, no matter what. And I mean, we're kind of seeing it happen even without Porzingis at times. It's like, yeah, this team is built to win. It may not be the most fun to watch at times, but this team is literally designed to win basketball games because the math says that they're going to win, and it works. It's easier with Porzingis, but I still think that the Celtics are probably going to win this series. Also, taking our, big brain thinking nerd caps off, do we really think that Adam Silver is going to let the Indiana Pacers make it to the NBA Finals? And I say this as someone who loves Indiana as a basketball state. No disrespect. And actually, I'm like saying it in a way of like, the NBA is just so blatantly disrespectful to some small market teams like the Pacers that, like, I see a world where no matter what, like, Adam Silver is not going to let the Pacers go to the NBA Finals this year.
Let's just say when Murray hits that bucket to make 58-38, Silver was at a low point because he's like, man, I gotta market some big Serbian dude who just wants to ride horses, okay, and his coach who, like, always talks in, like, axioms, but they never make any sense, all right? And then I have to deal – not only that, but I don't get any Eastern Conference games in Madison Square Garden. We have to go to Indiana. Who the fuck wants to go to Indiana to watch a basketball game, okay? That's not from the state, right? He's probably so pissed. So he's like, I think having Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels and a lot more of a, I don't know, raunchy group of characters that kind of fix things for him, because the Timberwolves very, like, I feel like even though they're a small market, like, Ant's just super marketable. All those guys are super, not that the Pacers aren't marketable. I think they're a very marketable team. I think they're the Showtime of the Midwest, but yeah. I mean, if Silver does have any little puppet strings going, he's not pulling them towards Indiana's favor. One other thing I want to mention, you were kind of getting at this with the airtight thing. A lot of teams, and this is one of the Celtics' like greatest strengths, right? With how many creators they usually have, like 3 or 4 guys who can just create for themselves on the floor at all times. In their starting lineup, it's Derek White, Jaylen Brown, Jayson Tatum, Drew Holiday. Boom, right there. Okay, they don't have to like hunt Haliburton. It's like whoever you put out, like you try to hide Haliburton on, can hunt him themselves. I think that's a huge advantage. Whereas like the Knicks, even with how like confident Hart is, he's not Drew Holiday as a driver. So like you can put Hallie there, you can hide him, you could try to put him in the action with Brunson. He got better at hedging as the series went on. Brunson was getting tired. That's not going to be something that the Boston Celtics have to deal with. And then of course, like the Jaylen Brown of it all, where it's like, who's going to guard him? I think my assumption is they'll put Siakam on Tatum to start, and then they'll have Nesmith on Brown. So then maybe they'll have a little bit better of an answer than Cleveland did, but Brown's just so physically imposing. I think it'll be tricky for them this series.
Yeah.
So
I wouldn't mind seeing the Pacers win just for the chaos it would cause, but
oh god, well, jeez, those Celtics fans, man, I would feel for them. I would definitely feel for them. Even though, like I've said multiple times, I'm fatigued by the Celtics team. They're like the team that they're the most like unspectacular team I've ever been fatigued by, because they've never won anything. They have like 2 NBA Finals wins to show for the last like 7 years. Yeah. That would be something. Jaylen Brown, oh man, this offseason would be crazy if they lost this game, if they lost this series. But should we just turn the main event, spend the next, like, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes just talking about what we really want to talk about?
Yeah, this is the marquee matchup for sure. Mm-hmm. Some fun facts to kind of lay the table. Regular season, the Timberwolves were 3-1 in the season series. Take those numbers with a grain of salt, because Luka did not play, and I think 2 of those games, all of those games occurred before the trade deadline. The Mavs one win that they had was by 7 points. And then all but one of the Wolves' 3 wins was decided by double digits. But again, Luka did not play in some of those. And all of these were before Daniel Gafford, before PJ Washington. So bear that in mind. They still had Grant Williams on the team. So make sure to just have that in the back of your mind as we discuss regular season stuff if it comes up. I want to talk a little bit, just to kind of lay the table. I want to talk a little bit about some differences between OKC and Minnesota that I think will be bridges that Dallas has to cross. I think OKC has good defensive personnel, but not necessarily long and good defensive personnel. Mm-hmm. Like, they have good defenders. Dort's a good defender. Jalen Williams is a good defender. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a good defender. But when you're talking about the combination of being a good defender and then like the length as well, mucking things up even more, that is one difference that I see taking shape, where I think there were more gaps that Dallas was able to work with just by nature of less length to worry about on the floor. I will be interested to see how Dallas deals with Minnesota's defensive length, just in terms of like the gaps that they're able to punish and create on a consistent basis. When Minnesota starts throwing traps at Luka, the passing angles that he's going to have to work with are probably going to be a little bit more complicated than if he has, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Dort trapping him. It's a lot different when you have Jaden McDaniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker trapping you, or Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards trapping you. But it's Luka Doncic, so he'll find a way. But then from there, the secondary creation from guys like Kyrie Irving, from a guy like Derrick Jones Jr. on the short roll. Minnesota is definitely a different beast because we talked about physicality. Minnesota is a lot more willing to be physical and get into that physical battle with you than I think OKC was. I think we definitely saw the limitations of OKC's physicality. And OKC lost the physicality battle, unquestionably. That's going to be a different story against Minnesota. So how do you think that looks for both Minnesota and Dallas heading into this series? Do you have anyone that you think is more adept to win that physicality battle, or do you think it's pretty much a toss-up right now?
The thing is, like, Minnesota just out-physicaled Denver, and I think Denver is like the most physical team out west. So the cool thing about physicality is it's really effort-driven. A lot of it is personnel. Like, there's limitations. Like, even with how hard OKC plays, like there's some limits to how physical they could be. But like, I think this series is close enough where it really is going to come down to effort in terms of the physicality category of it all. I'm trying to get the matchup squared away in my head because I think that's really instructive. So the first thing I want to ask you, this is kind of a little bit of a turn twisty in our little adventure of physicality, but we're going to circle back to the physicality component because we'll get there, right? Okay, but who's guarding Luka Doncic on Minnesota's side to start? What do you think?
I've thought about that,
mm-hmm.
and I think it gets tough because I think another big factor at play is the secondary rim protection if Gobert is being pulled out on ball screens.
So real quick, I think my initial thinking is Gobert is going to guard Derrick Jones Jr. That's my guess.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then Cat would be guarding whoever the 5 is. So Lively, Gafford.
I mean, gut reaction says Jaden McDaniels
mm-hmm.
or Ant. But I think the big thing is going to be, I almost see a world where I'd rather have Ant on Kyrie
mm-hmm.
and have Jaden McDaniels on Luka. But I think something that we're going to see come into play is Minnesota needing to have somebody, if Gobert gets pulled out of the paint, needing somebody down there waiting because of the driving ability of Dallas compared to Denver. Denver, I think, had guys that could drive, but they're not necessarily like Michael Porter Jr. can drive off a closeout, but he's not necessarily like flying to the basket like a Derrick Jones Jr. Or a wrecking ball like Josh Green. Aaron Gordon Jr. or Aaron Gordon is physical, but he's not necessarily like sprinting to the basket when he gets the ball. He's just bulldozing people. So what complicates things to me is like Minnesota having the personnel to just be able to like quickly make that rotation and provide that secondary rim protection on drives off closeouts. All of that is a complicated way of saying I'm not really sure who's going to guard Luka.
See, my initial thinking is Anthony Edwards, just because, one, it keeps him locked in and engaged on defense. I know it's a tall ask, especially when you're guarding the guy who holds the ball the most in the entire NBA, and then also having to be your team's primary creator. But he's had some – so this year he hasn't had too many matchups against Doncic, mostly because Doncic missed most games. But last season, I pulled it up, and where was it? Where were you? Okay, here we go. In 48.6 partial possessions, I still don't know how they calculate that. But 48.6 partial possessions, Luka was 5 for 14, so 35.7% shooting from the floor when guarded by Anthony Edwards. So Edwards has done a nice job against him. I still think Doncic might be a little bit too big for him I don't think it'll be as successful as like Dort. And also Dort can dedicate more of his stamina towards defense because he doesn't do as much on offense. But I don't like the Jaden McDaniels matchup I don't like Jaden guarding Doncic for Jaden's sake. I think it's better that he guards Kyrie. One, because Kyrie doesn't grift. He's a very ethical hooper. And so like Jaden can avoid picking up his ticky-tack fouls. And I think Luka would get him all the time, and also think he's a little too frail for Luka. So I don't know. I just think that's important to mention, like kind of those matchups and how that'll work out. I think one thing that's in my mind is I think this is going to sound weird because Jokic is better than Doncic. I'm not going to make that argument, but I think Minnesota is better equipped to guard Jokic than Doncic. And I think that matters a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's entirely fair. Go ahead, continue.
There's that. I don't know. There's that element. I don't know how much that comes into play, and how much that matters in the grand scheme. Another thing, again, I'm sorry to be pivoting all over the place because this series kind of has my mind all over the place because I think this also matters. This is another question I have for you that I've been thinking about a lot. Okay, and it's like this Minnesota defense is going to make you take tough shots, right? You saw it in Game 7, Jokic and Murray taking a ton of tough shots. Hit some, missed a lot. Do you think that – who do you think is the better tough shot-making duo? Murray and Jokic or Doncic and Irving?
You're really putting me on the spot with that one.
While you answer it, I'm just going to real quick explain why I'm asking. It's because I think Denver had the shot-making edge over Minnesota. But the thing is, it wasn't enough of an edge to make up for Minnesota's hellacious defense, right? And so what I'm trying to figure out is Dallas's shot-making enough to overcome that themselves? Because if it's not as much as the Jokic-Murray tandem, that's problematic. Because Jokic and Murray weren't enough to overcome that, if that makes sense.
I would say they're probably as close to equal levels of like tough shot making as you can probably get. I would maybe give the edge to Luka and Kyrie just because of the versatility of shots that I think they can get to and create on a consistent basis is a more diverse shot profile than you're working with maybe Jokic and Jamal Murray. Not to say that they're like one-dimensional by any means, but it's different. It's different when you have two wing/guard scorers compared to a guard and a big duo. It's just it's an entirely different approach. So I would maybe give the tiniest of edges to Kyrie and Luka. That being said, is that enough to shift the balance when we're talking about like okay, Denver's tough shot making was still pretty fantastic in regards to Jokic and Murray, but it wasn't enough to overcome the defense. Can Luka and Kyrie's tough shot making overcome the Minnesota defense? That's, I think, a fantastic question that I don't have a good answer to.
Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things I've been thinking about a lot, right? Is that element of it all. Another thing it's just the elephant in the room. We talked about it with the OKC and Dallas series. PJ Washington, what did he shoot? Like 43% from three against the Thunder?
Let's get some numbers here. PJ Washington. I know Derrick Jones Jr., his 3-point percentage kind of came back down to earth after some crazy games. But PJ Washington shot 41%. He's shooting 41% from three in the playoffs so far.
Yeah.
In the
and he
OKC
was a 32%.
Series, I'm not sure. Right.
He was a 32% regular season 3-point shooter. And I believe Derrick Jones Jr. was a 37.5% shooter in the first two rounds after being a 34% 3-point shooter in the regular season. So again, I'm not of the belief that – I do believe that some guys are just, they're built for the moment. It's like the Dante DiVincenzo thing we were talking about earlier. They're just ready to go, not afraid to take a big shot. Fine, I believe all that. But I don't believe that these two have become significantly better shooters just after like a week off. I just don't think that's possible. But so if that comes down to earth, what does that mean, right? But at the same time, Josh Green and Tim Hardaway Jr. are both shooting below their season average. Tim Hardaway Jr. is 2% below his season average right now. Josh Green's about 3.5%, which is a similar difference to what's going on with PJ and Derrick Jones Jr. So what if Josh Green picks it up and Tim Hardaway Jr. gets hot? So it's not like a purely set in stone thing. Like, oh, they're going to regress to the mean and then they're going to fall apart. Like there's other guys who've also been struggling who could come back up. And then also you have the Jaden Hardy of it all, who he's kind of like come into his own now. And he played 11 good minutes against the Thunder. I thought he looked really good in those 11 minutes. He could be something for them in this series. So that's like another thing I'm monitoring. Whereas off the top of my head right now, looking at it, I think that Minnesota has better bench between the two teams, better role players, right? But I
think that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah, but what if that changes? Because I thought that coming into the Dallas OKC Thunder series, I was dead set that OKC had the better role players. That's what it was going to come down to. And what happened? Dallas's role players played better than them. So that's another variable I'm looking at.
One thing that I can't not think about when I'm looking at this series is I think Dallas is a much better defensive team than they've generally gotten credit for post-trade deadline. I was pretty bullish on their defense post-trade deadline. I think they showed they can be a very good defensive team in the postseason, as we've seen with the OKC series and the Clippers series. I don't want to just write that off entirely. We haven't really mentioned it, but again, credit to their defense so far. One thing I'm really interested to see, and I talked about this a little bit earlier with OKC and their screening issues. Minnesota does not have those screening issues. I think Rudy Gobert, for all the criticisms that you can have of him offensively, screening is not one of them. Rudy Gobert is a very good screener. And I look at the contrast between what Dallas's defensive personnel was being tasked with doing in the OKC series compared to what they're going to have to deal with in this series. I think Dallas's screen navigation is going to be tested. And that's going to be a newish curveball that they're going to have to deal with. Because I think Dallas does well getting put in rotation when it was, Shea driving and Shea gets by his first defender and then they need to bring help and then they start rotating out of that, et cetera, et cetera. But it's different when you integrate the ball screen aspect because that's two offensive players now that you have to deal with. One guy gets hung up on the screen. Now it's a different set of rotations that you're making out of that relative to what you're dealing with when it's just a one-on-one guy drives, gets past first defender, draws another, et cetera. I think the big thing that I'm going to be watching there is OKC does not do a ton of off-ball action, which I think benefited the Mavs. They didn't have to process as much. They didn't have to make quick decisions on the defensive end. Minnesota still doesn't run a ton of off-ball action nearly as much as I think that they could. But I have seen them run off-ball stuff before that I think works very, very well. So I think Minnesota, maybe that is an area where they can shift things a little bit. Is, okay, we pretty much run things through like a Mike Conley screen and try to get the defense to crack out of that, or Anthony Edwards just creating off the dribble. But when Minnesota starts having Naz Reid come off of staggered screens on the weak side, like, that's where things get a little weird to me with Dallas. And I'm like, okay, are they going to be able to consistently navigate all of that and be able to have guys in the places that they need to be on a consistent basis without just being put in a blender? And then after that, the other piece of the puzzle is the Mavericks were switching a ton in the OKC series. I don't think they're going to be able to get away with that in this series, because the reason you're able to get away with switching against OKC is OKC can't punish mismatches nearly as much because they weren't really mismatches. You know, even Chet would have Josh Green on him. Chet can't punish that mismatch because he's not there yet. He's just simply not there yet. But you're talking Karl Anthony Towns with Josh Green on him. We saw Karl Anthony Towns punishing mismatches in the Denver series. We saw Rudy Gobert, maybe not punishing them directly, but he was drawing fouls. And he shot 7 of 9 from the free throw line last night, I believe. So if Rudy Gobert's hitting his free throws, it's like, that's not necessarily a viable strategy. You talk about the inverse of that, where Anthony Edwards is getting a Daniel Gafford on him. That was a mismatch that OKC was able to punish a little bit more. And the slower, more methodical approach of a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is different than the athletic, speedy, bursty, above the rim creation of Anthony Edwards. And then you also have the more methodical aspects of Ant's game that are starting to emerge a little bit. We'll see how much those get leveraged and how consistent of a basis we see that. That's where I think all of that is where I think Dallas probably has their hands full a little bit in figuring out this series. Not saying they can't, but I think it is a major contrast between the conference semifinals and the conference finals. Is OKC was a completely different type of basketball team that Dallas has a good answer for defensively. This series, I'm heading into it thinking this is very, very different, and they're going to have to figure it out just like any team does in any matchup.
But I will say, though, I don't know if this pod got published or not, but I was super skeptical of Dallas heading into the OKC series, because I'm like, they move the ball so much more than the Clippers. And I was like, Dallas is like, Jason Kidd's got them. Like, he knows how to get his boxes and elbows tightened up. Like, when it's like super static, he can get everybody in the right position, communicating and doing all that stuff, right? But then they proved me wrong there. So I think this defense has proven they're adaptable, they're resilient, they can take on, they're flexible. Like we were talking about earlier, they're flexible, versatile, whatever you want to call them. Two things one question for you, which is also another main point. By the way, guys, when we do these previews, when you're previewing a series, because again, the whole goal of this, we're the media pass, we take you behind the scenes. All you can do is point out the key parts of it, the swing factors, right? And then based on the knowledge we have, kind of try to decide how likely the pendulum will swing one way or the other. But so the 2 points I want to make. One is, I think that this series will be more of a Gafford series than the Thunder series, because what they needed against the Thunder was Lively's mobility, especially on those switches. He did a better job of keeping Shai in front of him than Gafford did, right? Whereas in this series, I think they'll need Gafford's size and his rim protection more, because he's going to be – that's something Ant hasn't had to deal with. Last round, he he hasn't played in these playoffs a really good rim protector yet. He hasn't played anybody in these playoffs as good of a rim protector as Gafford or Lively. So I think this will be a good Gafford series, a better one than the last one. But the question I have for you mentioned it a little bit, but how confident are you in Gobert's offense in this series? Because I think that matters.
I mean, about as confident as I normally am, which is not like particularly confident. I think obviously you have the issue of just like better defensive personnel with Gafford and Lively. That being said, I think the simple existence of Gobert with the more traditional defensive approach of the Gafford and Lively of it all, where like, okay, here's one center, here's Gobert, we're going to put our center on him. Like, it's pretty standard stuff. Whereas you look at Denver's approach, Denver was kind of being a little bit more weird with it. And like, yeah, we're going to have Jokic play up to the level and really test Gobert in the short roll, test Minnesota's ball handlers, getting the ball to Gobert in the first place, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be, to me, how well is Minnesota able to create outside of Conley and Gobert, you know, running a pick and roll. Because I think it's going to be pretty straightforward. Gobert's not going to have some of the easy looks that he got. And I don't think you can really rely on him to like be some offensive threat in this series. I think Gafford and Lively are going to be just too much to deal with. So to answer your question, I mean, not super confident that like he's going to be averaging 15 points a night in this series. I think he'll probably not do a whole lot of scoring at all. And he'll need to live and die on the glass, but who knows?
Yeah. Do you think it matters though? Like, do you think he needs to be like a net neutral offensive player in this series, or
in what sense though? Like in the sense of like, he still needs to, I still think his screening is going to be very important. I think like his roll gravity is still going to be very important. He'll still need to be aggressive offensively. Getting guys into foul trouble, I think, is going to be something that's necessary for Minnesota. You know, a lot of guys just foul Gobert because he's long and he flails his arms, honestly. So like that stuff offensively, I think, is still important. But in terms of him like scoring around the rim, I just don't see that happening a ton.
Because my guess is that Dallas is going to start the series off with, I actually don't know if I think that, but I don't know. We'll put a pin in that. Never mind. I was thinking that maybe they would start the series with PJ Washington on Gobert and then have whoever they decide to start at center on Cat. But the more I think about it, I don't know if that's how they'll start. I guess I'm curious because like one thing that Denver was able to do a lot in game 5, game 4 was just like switch like Murray or like KCP onto Gobert, and they didn't really pay a tax for it. And that's like kind of, I feel like, when Minnesota's really hurting, because that like defangs a lot of their actions. It's so easy to switch them, you know, to switch a pick and roll. It makes things a little bit harder on Ant, makes things a little bit harder on Conley. So I don't know, just something. I think that's another one of those things where I'm like, I think that's a swing factor. Is like, how good is Gobert on offense? Yeah. Well, do you feel comfortable making any predictions about the series? Like who you'd like to win? How many games? No. Yeah, we should probably watch one of those games or something. We'll have when we go on Friday, we'll have game 1 to talk about because they play on Wednesday. We'll have 2 Celtics Pacers games. One more question I want to ask you before we start to wrap up. So, you know, we're presuming that we're correct about Boston, they win, right? Do you see either one of these teams beating them in a 7-game series, Dallas or Minnesota?
I could see both.
Yeah.
I could see both of them beating Boston. No, that is not me saying I'm predicting the winner of the Western Conference to be the NBA champion. I'm saying I see a world where like I do not go into either of those series being like, oh yeah, Boston's going to win this. It's like, no, I could see Boston winning. I could see Dallas winning. I could see the Timberwolves winning. It is very much not cut and dry. Like I think any one of these teams can win the championship.
I'll say this. One thing both of these teams have going for them, as long as they remain physically intact, this like they don't just kill each other in this series. They would both go into that series with a physicality advantage. And I think it would be a pretty clear physicality advantage. And I think that right there unlocks the muddiness part of it, where it's like that's like Boston's biggest fear, is like getting in the mud. Because they play such a pretty platonic ideal basketball, like the 5-out spacing, and we take X amount of 3-pointers, and we have all these multiple ball handlers, and we run so many second side actions, and it's just like this is the way the game was meant to be played. It's just a nice clean car, right? Get some mud on it, things get a little bit messy. I think we both stumbled upon this on Friday, but I feel like Minnesota – I'm not saying I think Minnesota will win this series, but it's like one of those things where I feel like Minnesota probably has a better chance against Boston just because they can really, really get that team in the mud. And, like, especially if they're full court pressing, like, could you imagine just the anxiety that they would cause the Celtics?
It's the same problem that Denver ran into where they're like – getting pressured full court, and by the time they get the ball across half court, there's 15 seconds left on the shot clock. They don't have time to develop their offense. And Boston's the same way. It's like, yeah, you've got all this second side stuff that they have to run to get the matchups that they want, get the guys where they need to be, set up an empty side. Like, yeah, if Boston ends up getting up the court and there's 15 seconds left on the shot clock, Boston's going to have a way harder time generating the looks that they want. And that's not even factoring in the fact that I think Minnesota's rotations defensively are the kind that's going to give a perimeter-oriented team like Boston a lot of fits. That's not me saying I think the Timberwolves win that series, that theoretical series, but I think it is absolutely fair to say that Minnesota and Dallas both have a chance in a potential finals matchup against Boston.
Nice. Do we have anything else you want to say? I know it's usually your job to segue us out of here, but I'm feeling really segue right
now. One thing I will say about Minnesota that I've been sitting on this as well. OKC, I think there was a very noticeable reluctance to shoot spot up threes. And part of that is a credit to Dallas's defense. That being said, I think there were a lot of times where OKC had open threes and they passed them up. Due to what reason? I don't know. Only they can say. It could be timidness. It could be, they're not confident they had the time to get the ball released. Whatever the case may be, I don't know. Only they know in their heart of hearts. Minnesota, I think a big key for them, specifically with the Naz Reeds, the Jaden McDaniels, the Nickeil Alexander-Walkers, the Karl Anthony Towns, and even Anthony Edwards sometimes, be aggressive shooting those spot up threes. I think that's very important for them to really, really get Dallas questioning something defensively. Like, okay, they're getting a lot of open threes, a game or two here or there where they start hitting them really, really well. That's what's going to change things for Minnesota and open up everything. That I think OKC never quite got to that point where they could just open things up. Dallas always had OKC right where they wanted them. And I think Minnesota needs to take a page out of their book and say, okay, we need to punish the smallest lapse in like a quick rotation. And that's something OKC didn't do a great job of.
That just made me remember one last thing. The X factor. Jaden McDaniels offense. Because my suspicion is that Doncic is going to start out on him on defense. And like Doncic guarded Dort. Doncic had a tough defensive series. It was not a good the Clippers series he played pretty well. This last series was not good for him defensively. And it's one thing to have a bad defensive series guarding Dort. Jaden McDaniels is not Dort. You saw the way, dude. Did you see some of those drives? You see that spin move? Who was guarding him when he spinned off of him on the drive? and finished in the third quarter.
Yeah, I can't remember what I know.
You know what I'm talking about, though? Like, he was just doing some wicked stuff, man. Like, he is a really good basketball player. I think I kind of forgot it after, like, his just, like, I think me and you were both, like, of the camp who was kind of really high on McDaniels 2022-23. Like, we were kind of ahead of the curve, and then this season came in, and they became, like, part of the mainstream spotlight, and he just kind of had, like, a mass season by his standards.
Whatever.
But then he's been good. He's very good at this game of basketball we have. But, yeah, big X factor.
Yeah. I'm stupid excited for this series. I think it's going to be so good. Also, as we wrap up, shout out to Jason Kidd because he's a really freaking good coach, which is just funny to say because, he's had his fair share of criticism.
Glasses, dude.
That is going to do it for this episode of the Media Pass. Be sure to leave a 5-star rating if you're listening on any audio platform. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a question below if you want us to answer it at the beginning of next episode. As always, be sure to follow us on Twitter at AlexHoops_, at MattIssa15, MATISSA15. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you Friday.